Dave Scott, Boomer Music Experience. It's the August show, and since it's summer, Randy and I thought, well, who better to talk about than the Beach Boys? Let's go way back. And but Randy, you got a musical note first to pass along, and I want to give you the stage. So fire away, young man.
Thanks very much, Dave. Just before we get started on the Beach Boys, I would like to share with our audience Campfire Circle. Now, this is camp-inspired programs which are delivered year-round, lots of fun, friendship, and a community to children and families who are affected by childhood cancer, and this is right across Ontario. Your contact person, please, I'll give you her email. It's Ashley Dykun. That's spelled D-Y-K-U-N. And her email address is adykun@campfirecircle.org. Thank you.
Great work they do at those camps as well. I've been, over the years, had the opportunity to go out and visit and help with some fundraising, and always enjoy it. Marvelous people that work with the children and the families, and kudos to them. Keep up the great work. And it's one of those things that, in life that we all got to support and get out there and be part of. So, Ashley, keep up the great work. And Randy, let's turn our attention to the Beach Boys.
Sounds good, Dave. Well, I'd like to, in our program today, I'd like to share with our audience the formation of the Beach Boys, their peak years from 1962 to 67, the Reprise era, that's Reprise Records, which huge during that time, and from 1998 right up to present, and to finish off the program, the legacy of the Beach Boys, achievements, and accolades.
Perfect.
So, with that, let us begin. The Beach Boys were an American rock band. They formed in Hawthorne, California, and that was in 1961. Now, the group's original lineup consisted of brothers Brian Wilson, Dennis Wilson, Carl Wilson, and their cousin Mike Love, and friend Al Jardine. Now, distinguished from their vocal harmonies, they had like a adolescence-orient themes and musical ingenuity second to none. They were one of the most influential acts of the rock era. And they drew on the music of the older pop vocal groups, 1950s rock and roll, R&B, to create their unique sound. And under Brian's direction, often incorporated classical or jazz elements and unconventional recording techniques for innovative ways. And they did it better than no one. The Beach Boys began as a garage band, managed by their father, Murray Wilson. He was the composer, the arranger, the producer. He was everything. This man had it all. And he introduced his sons early in life to music. So in 1963, they had their first major big hit, Surfin' USA. And this was the beginning of a top 10 singles, many of them, that reflected the southern sound of California, the culture of surfing, cars, and romance. Hence, it was dubbed the California Sound.
Hey, Randy,
Now,
can I jump in and ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So that comes out, it hits the charts. I mean, you've already heard of Jan and Dean. Could you distinguish between the two groups? I mean, you're a young man then, you're listening to all this music. Did you at first think it was Jan and Dean, or give me a little insight into how, when that first hit, what your thoughts were?
That's a good question, Dave. That was a very close call. To listen to the Beach Boys and then Jan and Dean back to back, you would think, okay, are these the same group? Like, is this Beach Boys or Jan and Dean? Well, the Beach Boys they differed in their sound through some of the acoustical flares that Brian Wilson added to the harmonious chapters and stanzas of music that the Beach Boys created.
Yeah.
Whereas with Jan and Dean, great duo, they gave us a lot of great hits, Jan and Dean. They had totally a different surf sound, but in order to pick it up, you have to listen very closely to the surfer sound of the Beach Boys and Jan and Dean to decipher the difference between the two groups. Good question, Dave. Very good question.
Did the Beach Boys hit hard here, like in Ontario, when that sound started to come out? Did a lot of your friends, your peers, did they pick up on it? Was it really relevant at the time?
Oh yes, very much so. I remember back in 1965, I was at the Simcoe Scout Hut there on Talbot Street, and it was my first dance that I did that summer for like a summer surfer dance. And of course, at that time, it was all 45s vinyl and all that. And I had so many requests for the Beach Boys' California Girls. Dave, you wouldn't believe, like, knock it out of the ballpark. And I know it's kind of an unwritten rule, being a professional DJ, you try not to play a song during your 4 or 5 hour stint, play it twice. But then how I got around that, I got on the mic and I said, okay, well, this is the 5th time for the Beach Boys, California Girls. This group, you love it. Okay, here again, this was specially requested by Carol, or specially requested by Joe. That's how I got around it. I said, because a lot of people would think, God, he's played California Girls 5 times now. His repertoire of music in 45s must be fairly small, because look at this, 5 times. Whoa. But they loved it, and the dance floor was loaded every time I played it.
That's kind of crazy too, because you were probably overwhelmed going, what do I do? Right? Because you as a professional don't want to do that. But if that's what they want to hear, that's what they want to hear. You got to play to the crowd. Eh?
Right on. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I always find it intriguing, because you grew up, you're just a few years older than me, not that much, but I mean, you were right in that era. I love the music, but I didn't get to go through it the way you did. So you're in that world 360 looking around, feeling what's going on when that music comes out. And I think that's always cool. I think that some of our listeners can relate to that because they were there. And
absolutely, Dave.
I'm on a bit of a ramble here, but I remember the first time I heard the Beach Boys, and it was at my parents' home, and the record was on in the other room, and it was the Beach Boys, and it was exactly that. Once I heard it once, I couldn't get enough of it. I kept playing it, right? So that sound was really cool. And when it infuses it, as soon as when I put some on this morning before we did the show, it just brought back all those memories. Music so good at doing that, and the Beach Boys especially. So there you go.
Yeah, very good, Dave. The foundation of the Beach Boys at the time of his 16th birthday on June 20th, 1958, Brian Wilson shared a bedroom with his brothers Dennis and Carl, aged 13 and 11, and respectively in their family home in Hawthorne. Now, he watched his father, Murray, play piano. He had listened intently to the harmonies of the vocal groups, such as the Four Freshmen, who were very big in the 50s. And after dissecting songs such as, Ivory Tower and Good News, Brian would teach family members how to sing the background harmonies. And it was the beginning of these harmonies that really catapulted the Beach Boys into a unique California sound. Good for Brian Wilson. And that year for Brian's birthday, his mom and dad bought him a reel-to-reel tape recorder. Wow, how good is that? I still have 2 of these in my office downstairs, and they're in working condition. So Brian, very importantly, he learned how to overdub songs using his vocals those of Carl and their mother. Brian played piano with Carl and David Marks, who was a longtime neighbor, good time friend, and playing guitars they had received as a Christmas present. So here we go, the formation of the Beach Boys. Like, wow. Soon, Brian and Carl, they were avidly listening to Johnny Otis. I remember Johnny Otis on KFOX radio. Great radio show. And they were inspired by the simple structure and vocals of the rhythm and blues songs. Brian changed his piano playing style and started writing songs. And how good is that? This was the very beginning. And family gatherings brought the Wilsons in contact with their cousin, Mike Love. Brian taught Love's sister, Maureen, and a friend, harmonies. He taught both of those girls harmonies and dwelled on it. And how good is that? Later, Brian and Love and two friends performed at the Hawthorne High School. And the Hawthorne High School, during those years, that was a pretty good-sized high school. Now, Brian also knew Al Jardine, high school classmate. Brian suggested to Jardine that they team up with his cousin, Mike Love, and brother Carl. So Love gave the fledgling band its name, called the Pendletones. Now, there's a pun on this word, Pendleton. Pendleton was a style of a woolen shirt, which was popular at that time. All the guys wore the Pendleton shirts. And it was part of the surf look. Anyway, Dennis was the only avid surfer in the group, and he suggested that the group write songs that celebrated the sport of surfing. So Brian was busy at work. He finished the song Surfing, and with Mike Love, they wrote Surfin' Safari, which was a really, really good tune. So we can see here that the mother and father of the Wilson family were an integral part of having each of the sons come together, various harmonies, the music they had shared with their sons, and the different genres of music. Incredible, just incredible. It was a wealth of knowledge that, hey, that no other family to this day in music has shared with their sons.
Yeah.
And the result was extremely successful.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Now we'll take a look at the peak years for the Beach Boys. We look at 1962 to 1967.
Quick question.
And of course, some of the songs in that era, Surfin' Safari, Surfin' USA, of course, which was their first big #1 hit in 1963, Surfer Girl, Little Do Scoop, and May of 1963, I Get Around. Yes, great song, I Get Around. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hey, Randy.
Yeah.
Did Brian Wilson take any formal training? Like, I didn't, when I was looking up research, I didn't see anything, but the guy must have just been genetics. I don't know. Like, how do you know that young to teach harmonies as well as he did and have all that, you know, have all that talent? Like, man, like you said, I get it. It was his mom and dad, a very musical family, but it was like it was ingrained in him, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It was, along with the help of his mother and dad and all the Wilson brothers, for Brian Wilson, it was something that came natural to him. It was something that he had, but then you add a plus to that on what his mother and father taught him in music during the early years, 11, 12, 13 years old. Yeah. That was an extra bonus. But Brian Wilson, as a writer, producer, just a genius. It's a genius at production also. He had it all.
Yeah, he's kind of like Lennon and McCartney, right? Like he's just, they could visually hear a song, it seems. Like they could have it in their mind all worked out. And he was that type of savant. It's incredible. Yeah. All right. I'm sorry to
Yeah.
keep interrupting you, but this is fascinating to me.
No, this is great, Dave. The Beach Boys' first album, Surfin' Safari, was released in October of 1962. It was different from the rock albums of the time in that it consisted almost entirely of original songs, primarily written by Brian, with Mike Love and a friend Gary Usher. Another unusual feature of the Beach Boys was that although they marketed surf music, okay, their repertoire bore little resemblance to the music of the other surf bands, which was mainly instrumental and incorporated heavy use of spring reverb. So there we are. We have a unique sound, a unique surf sound by the Beach Boys, and you cannot really say that some of the other surf sounds were better than the Beach Boys. They were there, but not as good as the Beach Boys.
Okay.
That's my take on it anyway. But so in January of 1963, as I mentioned earlier, Surfing USA was their first top 10 single. And that is where it all began. And then look out, here we go. And so the album of the same name followed in March of 1963, and it reached number 2 on the Billboard charts. And as I have described in many of our broadcasts, Dave, Billboard Top 100, totally the Bible of music.
The Holy Grail, right?
And has been for years and years and years. Throughout 1963 and for the next few years, Brian produced a variety of singles for outside artists also. Among those were the Honeys, and they were a surfer trio, 3 girls, and he wanted to try and convince them that they could be as good as the Beach Boys. Here's a trio of girls with the surf sound, and Brian Wilson really threw his whole heart into this because he wanted these girls to succeed. But alas, it was not meant to be. So, but here again, Brian Wilson sharing his knowledge of music. Incredible. Now we take a look at February of 1964, the British invasion. The surf music craze, along with many of the careers of nearly all of the surf acts, was slowly replaced by the British invasion. Here come the Beatles. Yes, the Ed Sullivan Show, February 9th, 1964. Following a successful Australian tour that year in January and February, the Beach Boys returned home to face their new competition, the Beatles. Now, both groups shared the same record label in the United States, which is the Capitol record label.
Didn't know that.
And of course, Capitol, there was Capitol, Decca Records, Dot Records. Those were the 3 major record companies. And so Capitol Records, they supported the Beach Boys immensely. So they were in, but the Beatles, they were on Capitol too. They were in. So, I mean, how good is this? I mean, it was just Capitol Records are raking in money left, right, center, and you name it. But also a good record company to deal with. So with the British invasion, Brian wrote the last surf song in April of 1964. And of course, it hit the charts May of 1964. And of course, the song, I Get Around. Yes. Great song. Great song. Father Murray relieved of his duties as manager. He did, however, maintain a close contact with his sons, and he gave them advice, he gave them help as was needed. So, you know, here again, mother and father really taking charge here and sharing all of their knowledge and making the Beach Boys during the peak years what they were in the music of rock history.
It's pretty cool.
Later albums took on a different stylistic and lyrical path. And Brian was very intent on writing and producing. And here again, his talent, he was just a natural in writing songs. Okay, so in addition to that, he had his mother and father with the extreme knowledge that they presented for him. Just really a unique individual in music, in the music era, rock and roll era, period.
Do you see, from your point of view in 1964, then 64, 65, it's almost like the Beach Boys are growing up. I mean, they're still doing a little bit of the surfing sound, sorry, but there seems Brian Wilson sort of growing out of the cars and the surfboards and the girls, and his music sort of,
Mm-hmm.
it's like the Beatles. I mean, the Beatles sort of went through the same thing where all of a sudden there's this internal evolution of the music where it even
That's right,
goes
Dave.
deeper beyond what society's looking for. These guys are finding new ways, and I think probably the Beatles provided Brian Wilson with that challenge
Mm-hmm.
as well. I think they challenged each other. They were, like we have talked about off air, the Beach Boys were kind of the
Mm-hmm.
American Beatles, really, or I guess
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's the other
Exactly.
way around. Maybe the Beatles were the English Beach Boys. I don't know, but anyway, but that music sound
Mm-hmm.
just kind of the development, the maturity, I guess, of an artist. Is that what you think it is at that era?
Yeah. Oh, for sure, Dave. And the irony of the situation here with the Beach Boys versus the Beatles, the Beach Boys songs, the surf sound, did very well when those songs were released in the UK. And they flew right up the charts. And like, how good is this? It's kind of like, okay, the Beach Boys, they've done well in UK. The Beatles come to the United States of America, and they do extremely well in the US. So it's kind of a nice complement of sharing music of different patterns, different vibes, and different mixed genres. But what a success story for both these groups, the Beatles and the Beach Boys.
Isn't it interesting how R&B played such a critical role in both those bands?
Yes.
Like when you start,
very much so.
if you and I go back a little further, we can probably see the origins of, R&B, where they had that influence on the Beatles and the Beach Boys. Everybody in rock and roll, right, really had that influence. But the parallels with some of these, later on, I know the Beach Boys, or actually in a lot of their music, use classical and jazz, and then you've seen the Beatles doing the same thing. They're adding all these other elements to their music to make that big sound. It's interesting.
Oh yeah, very very much so. Yeah, and their albums, Pet Sounds.
Yep.
I think that was their best album ever. They put out a lot of good albums, the Beach Boys, but Pet Sounds, that defined the Beach Boys to no other extent. Would you agree with that?
I would, because I think too, what we forget, you and I have talked about this off air, is Good Vibrations wasn't even on that album. And Good Vibrations, they had worked on during that album. I read a story about a studio musician who was working for Brian Wilson on playing the organ, I think, on Good Vibrations. And he said, he thought he was just going in to do another 2.5-minute rock and roll song. And he said that Brian Wilson basically had everything worked out for Good Vibrations in his head. Like he literally, there would be a blank piece of paper, and this is Brian Wilson would say, play this, 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 and this. And he couldn't believe it. He said it was just another world. Like it was like going to an orchestra, he said, because just what he was looking for. And he had it all worked out. And that was just Good Vibrations. Like, and that didn't even make the album. It was on the next album. But Pet Sounds for
That's
sure.
Right.
I mean, I think it's, what did you say to me earlier? Rated number 2 album of all time?
Number 2 of all time. The Beatles, Sgt. Pepper, number 1 of all time.
What?
And there we go, back to back.
Let's talk about that for a sec. Let's look at that era. And those 2 albums were really close together. As a young man, what were you thinking? Like, you were living the dream, man.
Yeah, darn right. It was, Sgt. Pepper, the album there, the Beatles, every song on that album just super terrific. And same with the Beach Boys, Pet Sounds. It was like we were in the glory days. It was great.
You were literally getting the best of both worlds at that point. Were the Beach Boys, and I know the Beach Boys album Pet Sounds took a while to catch on, to become a classic, but was it overwhelming? Like, I mean, you basically could not turn on the radio in that era and not find a good song. Like, it's just, there was so much talent coming together in that era.
Right.
Like, I mean, did you have one over the other that you preferred?
Ooh,
I don't want to put you on the spot, but I mean, like you just said,
I would say, Dave, both Sgt. Pepper album by the Beatles and Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys, they both had their significant merit to the rock era as we know it today, and they're both equal. They're both equal as far as I'm concerned.
The diplomacy of Randy Hummel, Classy FM, right there. He won't give me an answer, folks. I will get it off air. I will get it off air. I'll bug him until he tells me. But I mean, yeah, I mean, so you know, when those two albums are out in the mid to late '60s, did it create? This is going to sound weird. Did it create a vibration? Did it resonate so well with everybody? Because you're maturing with that music. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So for you growing up in that era and being a boomer, was that significant in your time frame?
Much so, Dave. Very much so. During that era, mid '60s, I was at SCS in grade 10, 11, I guess. Yeah. And on May 16th of 1966, I remember that year, another month of school to go, Pet Sounds was released, and it was widely influential. And what Pet Sounds did for the Beach Boys as a group, it raised the band's prestige as an innovative rock group, better than any other band at that point in time, but also during the rock era. So not only during the 60s, but through the entire rock era to present. And early reviews of the album in the U.S. ranged from kind of tentatively positive, but as time went on, the sales of Pet Sounds just spiraled, and just unbelievable. And Capitol Records, of course, just raking it all in. But that was a wonderful album. And to this day, Pet Sounds, as I say, it's a tough call. Pet Sounds and Sgt. Pepper's album with the Beatles, it's a tough call to say which is better. I think they both have their merits.
And do you think, I mean, obviously we'll talk about the next Beach Boy album coming out in 66 or 67, I can't be sure, but with Good Vibrations. But do you think that album was the peak for the Beach Boys, in your opinion?
Definitely, yeah. Pet Sounds, absolutely. And you're right, Dave. Throughout the summer of 1966, Brian, he concentrated on finishing the group's next single, Good Vibrations. Now, instead of working on whole songs with kind of clear, large-scale structures, what Brian did, he limited himself to record short, interchangeable fragments, or what they call modules. Okay. And through the method of tape splicing, the reel-to-reel tapes now, we're in the reel-to-reel tapes, each fragment could then be assembled into a linear sequence, allowing any number of larger structures and divergent moods to be produced at a later time. So here, they may be producing a certain sound for a few bars, and then down the road, a month later, they're bringing into it some different acoustical electrical guitars, or maybe some organs, this type of thing. So some of these songs took 2 or 3 years to complete. And I think that's important to note. It just wasn't into the production studio, da-da-da-da, that's one song, da-da-da-da, like ripping songs off left and right. Brian Wilson was an extremely accomplished genius at songwriting and production. studio
And they
production.
kind of changed the way music was played on AM radio when like Good Vibrations come out, like Pet Sounds too, some of the songs, because they were a little bit longer. And like you said,
That's right.
It must have drove the record companies nuts in that era, because they wanted an album basically every 6 months. And there's Brian Wilson going, no, I'm going to do it this way, and it's going to take this long. And well, he didn't even know how long it was going to take.
Exactly.
So that kind of threw them, really, didn't it? And I can't even imagine the stress he must have been under, because, we both know the record companies wanted more music out. But this guy understood what he was going to create. It looked to me like he was trying to create that perfect album. Like he was trying to be, always him. And like you said earlier, him and the Beatles were competing. So it was trying to make the best album you possibly could. And that's where the public benefited the most, because you had such a big 1A, 1B punch with those two bands. Incredible. Yeah.
That's right.
And we didn't even mention the Stones.
Yeah. No. And, but it was explicitly an American in style and subject, the Beach Boys music. And it was a conscious reaction also to the overwhelming British dominance of popular music at that time. And, some of the music incorporated that were chantings, cowboy songs, explorations, this type of thing. So, yeah, it's definitely an American sound, the Southern California sound. And, hey, gotta hand it to Brian Wilson, though. He really was the driving force, the creative stylist for all of the music. And unbelievable. We now hit the years from 1967 to 1969. The Beach Boys had developed a musical and lyrical sophistication that contrasted their work from before and after. So here again, they're experimenting with different sounds. And at the time, the rock music journalists typically valued the Beach Boys' earlier records over this new experimental work that Brian Wilson was creating. So I guess with the rock journalists, they kind of had a comfort zone of, let's stick just to the surf sound. Well, no, Brian Wilson wasn't happy with that. He wanted to experiment, evolve a different sound, and move forward with the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
So, and the album Smile, it had been canceled. The Beach Boys were still under the pressure of that contractual obligation with Capitol to finish it. But at the time, in '67, that was put on hold, the Smile album, at the frustration of Capitol
That's what we talked about it.
Yeah. In July of 1967, the lead single, Heroes and Villains, which you can see right here, Heroes and Villains, arriving after months of public anticipation, it reached number 12 on the Billboard Top 100. And it was met with good positive insight. And here again, though, a totally different sound for the Beach Boys. So the Beach Boys, then they recorded a new album. This was 1968. The new album was called Wild Honey. And this was an excursion into soul music, okay? And it was kind of a self-conspicuous attempt to regroup the Beach Boys, we might say, regroup them as a rock band, and kind of forget the orchestral implementation of past. It was interesting. Brian Wilson, and I quote, "When we did Wild Honey, I wanted to get more involved in the recording end of things, and he wanted a break from doing the writing. It's been too long. He just had to get away from the writing process. So Wild Honey was released on December 18th, 1967, in competition with the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour. Wow. How good is that? So now we take a look at the Reprise years. Of course, Reprise Records, Frank Sinatra had a wonderful career with Reprise Records. And Reprise Records in the 60s, especially mid to late 60s, early 70s, they were a great record company. So the group signed with Reprise Records in 1970. And Scott Schneider, he described the label as probably the hippiest and most artistic-friendly major label of the time. And Reprise Records was. He hit it right on the head in the nutshell there. So by the time the Beach Boys' tenure ended with Capitol Records in 1969, they had sold 65 million records worldwide.
Really?
That's right.
Oh, my
65 million records worldwide, closing the decade as the most commercially successful American band in popular music. Well, yeah, I guess so. 65 million records? I can't even comprehend 65 million records.
Do you think now then, since they've sold 65 million records, Pet Sounds is sort of the album? Do you think that was sort of the start of the demise a little bit of Brian Wilson? Do you think, I know he battled with depression, anxiety throughout his life, but do you think, where else do you go from there, right? You're at that pinnacle and you're competing with the Beatles. Yeah, you've just created your masterpiece. So you could see probably how he turned away a bit from writing. And what else is there? You've accomplished everything you've set out to do. I don't know what his mindset was at that time, but was he starting just to sort of fade away from the band at that point in 69, 70?
Yeah, I honestly believe so, Dave. It was kind of true reflections here. He was kind of, I think, burnt out to an extent from the writing of songs, from the producing, and in time, it does take its toll on your health. So, but the Beach Boys' greatest hits compilation, Endless Summer, another great album, was released in June of 1974 to unexpected success. Well, that's what the critics were saying. Well, why would it be unexpected success? The Beach Boys, since the early 60s, were always successful. So why wouldn't they be successful with their album Endless Summer? I don't understand the critics' approach there, but anyway, it had a 155-week run, and Endless Summer album, it sold well over 3 million copies. There you go.
Yeah,
3 million copies. Yeah, geez. Wow. The Beach Boys became the #1 act in the United States, propelling themselves for opening with Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young.
Not too bad, yeah.
Hey. And that was the summer of 1974. To headliners selling out to basketball arenas, you name it. And at the end of 1974, Rolling Stone magazine proclaimed the Beach Boys Band of the Year.
Wow.
The Beach Boys were named Band of the Year for 1974. And this, Dave, it was based on their live performances. And so good for Rolling Stone.
Picking up on it.
Because when you get your name mentioned or band or artist mentioned in Rolling Stone, here again, that is a Bible of magazines for artists and bands and the like. So, so they're doing good. At the beginning of 1977, the Beach Boys had enjoyed their most lucrative concert tours ever, with the band playing in packed stadiums, and they earned $150,000 per show.
Them. Yeah, make it while you can.
That is better than most. Better than most. Yep.
In that era, too.
So, Then, of course, in 1983, tragedy, the death of Dennis Wilson. He drowned at the age of 39 in Marina del Rey. And while he was diving from a friend's boat, and he was trying to recover some items that he had previously thrown overboard.
Yeah.
That's very unfortunate. Anyway, in 1988, the Beach Boys claimed their first U.S. #1 single in 22 years with Kokomo.
So
What a great
that
song,
came out in
Kokomo.
1988? Wow.
Yeah, 1988, yeah. And it topped the charts for a total of 10 weeks, Kokomo, Beach Boys. And of course, it appeared in the film Cocktail and on the album Still Cruisin', which did triple platinum in the United States. We're talking 1988. Yeah. The group, though, is still, Dave, largely identified from its hits from the early 60s, the Beach Boys. And I think that will always be. But
anyway, in that era, too, between the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, they kind of became that live band. Really, that's what they were known for. It was sort of
that's right.
Your beach party band to go see, right? So, and that's
absolutely.
And that's how they made. I'm obviously with, I think they grossed 100 million copies of all their albums, but I mean that was sort of their touring was probably their income too, a fair portion of it over those years. But that's where they really, I think that's how they cemented themselves into future generations. Because everybody went to see the Beach Boys at some point, it seems.
You got it. Yep. Carl Wilson. He passed away on February the 6th of 1998 at the age of 51. And that was 2 months after the death of Audrey, who was the mother of the Wilsons. In 2000, ABC TV premiered a 2-part television miniseries entitled The Beach Boys, An American Family. And that really, Dave, dramatized the Beach Boys story. It was produced by John Stamos. And, of course, John Stamos, he's well known for movie production and TV production. And on October 31st of 2011, Halloween night, the Capitol Records, they released a compilation box set dedicated to the album Smile in the form of Smile Sensations. The album garnered universal critical acclaim, and it charted in both, get this, in both the U.S. Billboard and the U.K. Billboard. Yeah. Here we go. Okay. And it went on to win the Best Historical Album at the 2013 Grammy Awards.
Is it true? Is that true? That's their only Grammy?
Wow. That is correct.
Again, right? All those albums, all that music, all those years. And that's their first Grammy in 2013. Boy, that's crazy. That's crazy.
It is crazy.
You would have thought they would have a huge collection
of them. Band. Yeah. In 2016, Mike Love and Wilson published memoirs as Brian Wilson, Good Vibrations, My Life as a Beach Boy, and I Am Brian Wilson, respectively. In July of 2018, Brian Wilson, Al Jardine, Mike Love, and Marks reunited for a one-off question and answer session, and that was moderated by director Rob Reiner, and this took place at the Capitol Records Tower in Los Angeles, which I've been into. That's quite a building, Capitol Records, downtown LA. It's kind of
interesting that it would be Rob Reiner, too. Somewhat of a 70s sitcom star and movie director, producer. He's did it all. So it's pretty cool that he would have that interest in doing something with the surviving Beach Boys.
Absolutely, Dave. And it was the first time the band had actually appeared together in public since their 2012 tour. Wow. Unbelievable. The Beach Boys are the most critically acclaimed, commercially successful band of all time. And absolutely agree. Full marks. They have sold over 100 million records worldwide. And the group's earlier songs made them major pop stars, here again, not only in the States, but also in the UK, in Australia, and right here
Worldwide.
in Canada. So it's, they were worldwide known.
Oh, no problem there, Randy. I think you need to get out and get some surfing.
That was
and
a jumbo
swimming.
sneeze. Yeah. And that way I'll have good vibrations.
Good one.
Oh, jeepers. Oh, dear. Oh, boy. The Beach Boys are probably one of the most influential acts of the rock era. And I would have to agree with that statement, Dave. They've worked hard. They've had a lot of good times. They've had a lot of sorrow in the family. And it's really good to see them get that Grammy Award in 2013. Very, very important. Now, this year in 2022, the group is expecting to participate in a 60th anniversary celebration. And as we speak, they're going to announce a major deal with a streamer for a definitive documentary on the Beach Boys and a 60th anniversary celebration. Now, they're also planning a tribute concert, which will be affiliated with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and, of course, Sirius XM with amazing acts. So that's adding the value, and that's why a lot of people in the music world have invested in the Beach Boys. And I really hope that this 60th anniversary celebration comes off, and that is slated for this year, 2022.
And I think it was recently you and I talked to off air. It was just Brian Wilson's 80th birthday. So, kind of cool.
That's
all
right.
That's coming together. Go ahead.
Yeah. And on the super oldies, here's a 45. I don't know if you can actually see it, but anyway, what it is, it's the Beach Boys medley. It's a 45 of all of their hits, and this is no cracks or snaps in this one. This is an original, Capitol Records, and on the back, God Only Knows. Now that song, God Only Knows, Dave, Paul McCartney was stated as saying that of all the songs, of all the Beach Boys, and of all the music he's ever heard, God Only Knows, that is Paul McCartney's favorite song
it's pretty
of all
crazy,
time.
Isn't it? Yeah.
How good is that?
And, that's the other thing, too, when we were talking earlier about the competition between the Beatles and the Beach Boys and the Stones. I mean, the Stones are still going, which is incredible. But, I mean, they seem to have, if you look at the sort of the time frames for the Beach Boys and the Beatles, there seem to be those 15 years roughly, from start of band till they all went their own way, it seems, right? And it's just, like you said earlier, I think that's such a buildup. They were so in tune, both those bands, and everybody was listening to them. It was just a back and forth with albums that, that competition was, I think it was a friendly competition, but I think it was really cool the way they did it, that happened in that era when you were, when you were a young man. And how do they, you look at the Beatles and you look at the Beach Boys, and they're kind of the 1-2 punch that's still going, right? They don't go away. They don't, like a lot of music over the years will fade away, but they seem to have that, that intensity or something that people seem to pick up on, that vibe, and the music just seems to stick, which is incredible, really, when you think about it, to come through all those generations.
Absolutely. And the Beatles, on the internet, you can see the various companies, they're really pushing the Beatles songs in T-shirt reflection, in caps. It's unbelievable. And today, Dave, I'd like to, before we close, I would like to present this. It's called Reflections of a Boomer to our audience. And in this sequence of passage of words, you'll be able to identify with a song of the past. Here we go. Reflections of a Boomer. I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I've been through the desert on a horse with no name. I've gone to Kansas City. I sang in the sunshine. I've been on the road again with Georgia on my mind. Like a rolling stone, I've given peace a chance. I've put a camel to bed and danced the last dance. Mr. Tambourine Man played a song for me. I've whispered words of wisdom, let it be. I've fallen into a burning ring of fire and walked the line. To all the girls I've loved before, you were always on my mind. I've been everywhere. I've been so lonesome I could cry. I've driven my Chevy to the levee when the levee was dry. I've been to Itchycoo Park in a yellow submarine. I've made the scene in a time machine. I've done the hokey pokey and turned myself around. I've welcomed baby back to the poor side of town. I've followed the tracks of my tears down a long and winding road. I've kept on searching for a heart of gold. I've sought shelter from the storm. I've sat on the dock of the bay. I've rocked around the clock on a sunshiny day. I've knocked on heaven's door while blowing in the wind. Joy to the world. Those were the days, my friend. Lay, lady, lay, in crimson and clover. It's been a hard day's night. The party's over.
Great way to finish the show, Randy. That was awesome. Yeah, I love that.
How good is that?
Beach Boys, folks. What an experience. What a ride today with Randy Hummel, Classy FM. All your DJ needs, give him a shout. He'd be glad to come to your party, especially if you want to do a 60s party. Randy, take care, and
Absolutely.
We're going to talk next month. Great way to finish the show. I love that. You're going to have to post that. Take care.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Dave. Enjoyed working with you. Have a good week and be safe on those roads.